Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going straight into the next session. We're running a little bit late. I'd say at the beginning that one of our panelists, Professor De La Rey, needs to leave pronto. So if she gets off the stage, it's not that she's outraged by anything I've said, although that may yet happen. I'd like to introduce my panel, and you will notice is perfectly balanced gender-wise, and I'm proud to be able to say that, so thank you very much indeed. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce the Commissioner at the Public Service Commission, whose name I've rehearsed with her now about 3 times, so that we've decided that after that I'll just refer to her as the Commissioner. Then we've got Nero Cook, who I can pronounce his name because I know him very well. He's Capital Maharaja Group in Sri Lanka. He's also on our board, and he's at the end there, smiling. On my right is the Honourable Joseph Garcia, who some of you will have listened to earlier in some of our earlier deliberations, Deputy Chief Minister of Gibraltar. And then on my left, Charlotte Parkhill, who is the chair of the Auckland Chamber of Commerce, and then the aforementioned Professor Cheryl De La Rey, as chair of the Association of Commonwealth Universities. The subject of this meeting this morning is to talk about the Commonwealth, the dynamism of the workforce. 60%, this oft-repeated figure we've heard, of the population being under the age of 30. We're going to look at how the private sector can maximise the potential of this youthful workforce. We're going to look at human capital and migration, and also how mobility can enhance skills and opportunities across the Commonwealth. And so, just to kick off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a couple of questions of each of our panellists, after which I'm just going to ask if there's any question from anyone in the audience before we move on. This is my cunning reinvention of what I've been asked to do, which will be completely abandoned if we start running short of time. But I want to give you the opportunity to ask the panellists some questions if I can. So I'm going to start off, if I may, with the Commissioner of Public Service Commission of Samoa. And I'm going to ask, in any of the Commonwealth SIDS, but particularly in the Pacific, the largest employer is always government. What strategies can governments adopt to build resilient and skillful workforces as they consider transforming their workforces? Commissioner.
Your Lordship, facilitator of this panel, I'm extremely privileged to be part of this. Belated welcome to Samoa from the Public Service Commission, as this is the second and last day of the Business Forum. But I trust that you've had a good experience with our small island country. Now, the theme for the CHOCOM is One Resilient Common Future, transforming our Commonwealth. And what is our Commonwealth? The simple answer is, of course, our people, our human resources. Our people is a commonwealth that we all possess, whether we are big nation states or small island developing states. Our people is the difference between a thriving economy or one that struggles to survive. The difference between cultural survival or cultural annihilation. The difference between real and aspirational national sovereignty. But we must also be real in terms of our specific contexts. So speaking from the point of view of a small island developing state, Samoa, in any of the Commonwealth SIDS or smaller SIDS, the largest employer is government. It is therefore incumbent that government must take full responsibility for building relevant and resilient workforces. The Samoa experience and strategy is to be fully responsible for national workforce planning. And to do this, the Public Service Commission in Samoa has taken the lead but has also engaged the private sector and all stakeholders, including employers, businesses, workers' organizations, community leaders, civil society, professional organizations, ministries, faith-based groups, state-owned enterprises in this endeavor. Together we can move is an apt slogan here as it's painted on our cruise ship that's currently in the harbor. The national vision is a capable and responsible national workforce that meets developmental needs for improved resilience, growth, and prosperity for all people and communities. That is, to have a national workforce that has the right number of people with the required skills, competencies, talents, attributes, and know-how to perform all the required responsibilities, functions, services, and development initiatives that our society needs for fostering social harmony, safety, and freedom for all. And this is from our government pathway to development strategy. Workplaces, businesses, industry may develop their own workforce plans, but the responsibility for equipping and strengthening skills development, upskilling, reskilling is government's responsibility through its educational institutions, formal training providers, and non-formal providers, which include the traditional centers of learning in our communities. This means the recognition of the value of traditional and cultural skills, the survival of which are essential to our survival and sustainability of our culture, the society and the identity of all Samoans, whether in Samoa or in the diaspora, and inclusive of the diversities of identities that continue to evolve. The lead agencies in this endeavor is the Public Service Commission, working closely with all relevant ministries of government, but as well bringing in civil society. The implementers are civil society, employers associations, professional associations, workers' organizations, government ministries, and state-owned enterprises. Resourcing is important, but it's intended to be the government budget, and as well as our development partner support, and we count the Commonwealth as one of our development partners. The National Workforce Plan has clarified issues of demand and supply, key issues, challenges, and gaps. It has identified current and future national workforce needs in the immediate, medium, and long term, a forecast of needed skills, issues, challenges, and gaps for Samoa. National priority needs are identified, and implementation roles by all the stakeholders are clarified, with the underlying assumption that all are needed in this effort of national workforce planning and implementation to achieve the intended outcomes. Government as the largest employer in Samoa was a positive element in COVID-19 crisis because it meant that while most private sector businesses floundered, especially in the hospitality and tourism industries, villages and families were supported by family members employed in government services. The government public service did not close down. The fact that Samoa also still had its customary land ownership system intact meant that people were able to go back to some form of subsistence living to tide them over those particularly uncertain times. The impacts of COVID-19 highlighted the omissions of development in the last 20 years here in Samoa, where priority was given to tourism at the expense of agriculture and fisheries. The workforce needs for the latter are addressed in our national workforce plan. Now, since 1999, most Pacific SIDS have been carrying out reforms in the public services with the underlying agenda of reducing the public service and growing the private sector in line with the liberal economic thinking of the 1990s. Samoa has been part of that movement where major public enterprises were semi-privatized with the intention of eventually transitioning to full privatization. 25 years later, looking back, there are mixed results of these reforms. Only about 1% of the state-owned enterprises made the transition to full privatization. And in fact, there is now a beginning trend towards government fully taking over some of these enterprises again. There are obviously many questions to be answered in terms of the relevant economic needs, the kinds of business enterprises, the future of work, and what that might look like in Pacific SIDS in 2030 and beyond. So when we talk about transforming our workforce, what do we mean? It's critical, particularly for SIDS, for the obvious fact of scarce resources. For Samoa, in addition to the obvious ongoing investments in education, in the schools, especially for the predominantly young population, this is becoming more and more critical also in our post-education and training subsector, where we have invested in the setting up of a university and several post-school education providers to address skills needs that are required to deal with our human resources development needs. The developments in the last 40 years has also seen the establishment of national qualifications authorities in Pacific SIDS, not only for quality assurance, but also to address relevant skills for the economic, social, and cultural development of the country. Questions of relevance, quality, efficiency, and sustainability are fundamental to investments in education. Quality pre-service training in any field is required. Very often, national budgets are insufficient for extension into further training or value-added training to meet workforce needs. And this is where our partnerships with development partners are important. Australia and New Zealand and Australia continue to be our main partners in this work, and we are extremely grateful for them. But we have also worked with other Commonwealth countries and non-Commonwealth countries. And yet, our experience of reforms in the last 20 years is telling us that some of it has failed, and that privatization is not the complete way to go, that governments must continue to play a central role ensuring the robust capacity of its human resources to meet our developmental needs. Hence, Samoa is engaged in a repositioning concept to the public service to meet our development needs, to reawaken the basic values of public service with emphasis on leadership and capacity building, ethics and performance, and good governance. The development of a national consciousness that excellence in service is based on observance of basic human rights for all, specific rights for women, children, workers, people with disabilities, the RAIN community, and the Rainbow community. This is our mandate as a central agency of government for the next 5 years. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Can we just say a little bit more about you mentioned New Zealand and Australia, the labour, mobility and seasonal work streams offered by larger economies have become a significant contributor to SIDS economies. Just say a little bit more, if you would, about the implication for these schemes for workforce planning, education, training and capacity building within SIDS.
Labour mobility, such as seasonal work, and now the longer PALM schemes offered by Australia, is recognized by the small island states as an opportunity for economic benefits for individuals, for their families, leading to community development in villages. However, it's a two-edged sword in terms of our consideration of our human resources development in the country, where we have seen the depletion of our workforces, particularly in our tourism subsector, hospitality, and elsewhere. And it's also encroaching into our public sector workforces. So there is a need here for local government, for domestic governments, to really think through an integrated, a well-integrated policy of economic development, which includes holistic consideration of numbers of people, the selection of people, pre-departure, orientation and education, welfare and care of the workers while on assignment, value-added skills while employed in the receiving country, and repatriation back into the community. And in Samoa, we're finding the latter to be quite problematical. But all the partners involved and workers' associations have a major role to play here in terms of what we do in terms of policy development. Yesterday, I was in the round table that was addressing this issue, and the point was made by some people that policies are good, but in essence, what's happening at the moment is that a lot of what's taking place in RSA work is conducted on the basis of agreements rather than specific policies of government or specific economic policies, particularly of the sending countries. So these are some of the issues that we need to address. Because at the end of the day, it's not just money that's being sent back. There's a social and a cultural cost in terms of families that are left behind and many other things that you would understand. So when the elements are in place in terms of policies and real practical action, then we can resolve many of the issues that continue to be raised at Pacific regional conversations. And this is quite a dominant issue in the regional conversations that take place here in the Pacific.
Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner. It's all about the start to the pathway, that being education, of course. Professor De La Rey, how can universities across the Commonwealth work more closely together to create standardized pathways for students to gain skills that are relevant across all the various regions? And what role can the ACU play in facilitating this cross-border collaboration to ensure equitable access to quality education?
Thank you, Lord Swires. And Talofa, distinguished guests, it's a real pleasure for me to be here and a privilege to have the opportunity to share with you some of the work that the ACU is undertaking. First of all, in case you're unfamiliar with us, the Association of Commonwealth Universities is the oldest network of universities in the world, and we have over 400 member universities represented by their university presidents or vice-chancellors. Now, what we have in common is our history, and that gives us a head start in addressing the question that you've posed, Lord Swires, in that our credentialing system has a common origin. So the way in which our qualifications are organized, for example, we have a lot in common. But of course, much has changed since then, and this is where qualifications frameworks have come into play, as the Commissioner has referred to. Now, qualifications frameworks deal with two matters. The first one is quality, ensuring that if somebody has a qualification called, let's say, a Bachelor of Laws, in one jurisdiction, it is of the same standard or quality as a Bachelor of Laws in another jurisdiction. That's where a qualifications framework comes into use. The second thing it helps us with, as the Commissioner referred to, is relevance. So through having a qualifications framework it's usually under a qualifications authority within a jurisdiction, they ensure through partnerships with industry bodies that those remain relevant as expectations in the world of work and the world of businesses change. And what we're doing in the ACU, across our members, we have come together to work together to look at how we can foster greater mobility across our respective jurisdictions. So by making sure that our qualifications frameworks all speak to one another, in other words, they look similar, and what we're aiming to is having a shared qualifications framework across all our Commonwealth members. What's really helping us in this effort is technology. Our vision is that by working with our members, using technology, we will have a transparent system of qualifications that any person or any business or any prospective student looks at and will be able to rely on that qualification, make informed choices as to the standard of the quality and the relevance to whatever their profession or career aspirations might be. One of the interesting developments is the introduction of micro-credentials, and this has become really important given how the world of work is changing, and especially given the investment required in furthering one's qualifications. More and more people, regardless of age, want to upskill, reskill, but would like to continue working. And that's where the micro-credential comes into play. It's rather new, And what we're aiming to ensure is that micro-credentials are also enable mobility across jurisdictions, but very importantly, are stackable over periods of time so that you could do small bits of learning and over a period of time acquire, let's say, a master's degree or a more a longer-term qualification such as a bachelor's degree. So to answer the question, Lord Swires, there's much that's been done by the ACU. The final bit I'd like to mention is the importance of accreditation and audits. Now, all our universities have audits, or these are accredited qualifications, and this is where two important types of bodies come into play. The first are professional associations, such as engineering councils, and engineering councils or teachers' councils or the like are usually comprised of people who are already active in the profession, and they constitute panels that help us with our accreditation and auditing systems. The other aspect are partnerships, as I mentioned earlier, and the Commissioner already mentioned how the Australian Qualifications Authority is working with the Samoan Qualifications Authority, and I'm delighted to say that I sit on the board of the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, and we are working really closely with the Samoan Qualifications Authority and the respective engineering councils, medical councils, legal bodies, and the like. So I think as a Commonwealth, the work that we're doing, and specifically through the ACU and the vision we have, we are seeing great progress in that area, enabling greater mobility, but most importantly, for prospective employers. If you look at the qualifications framework, if we make it as transparent as possible in making your decisions about employing our graduates or our prospective students, you can trust in our qualifications that they're credible, that they're the highest level of quality, and very importantly, they're relevant to the workplace.
Thank you, Gerald. Some food for thought there. Just a couple of things. You talked about lifelong learning. You might say a little bit more about that. And also what challenges, you talked about technology and how you're going to make use of it, but what are the challenges through AI and so forth to today's and tomorrow's workforce? The demand for skilled workers is obviously evolving. How do you see the universities across your sector adapting their curricula and partnerships to prepare young people in this ever-changing workforce? And how, importantly, can you try and ensure that education remains accessible to both urban, but critically, in this part of the world, rural communities in the Commonwealth?
Thank you. There are many questions in there, and I'll do my best in the shortest possible time. First of all, the demand for skills. Let me address that one. Universities have changed their curricula in order to both satisfy quality but also relevance, as I mentioned earlier. And one of the ways in which we are bridging the gap is by working more closely with industry partners. For example, I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Canterbury, and we have a partnership with Business Canterbury, which is the Chamber of Business in our economic region. And across the Commonwealth, I'm seeing more examples of that. We also invite representation from industry on our advisory boards, advising us on the structure of our curriculum, ensuring that there is enhanced employability for our students after graduation. The next way in which this is being addressed is through concerted efforts around work-integrated learning. Now, universities have generally organised our curricula in two broad categories. We offer professional education, and that's often linked to a body like an engineering council or teaching council or a legal council. And then there are the general formative degrees, such as a Bachelor of Science or a Bachelor of Arts. What has shifted is that across these sorts of qualifications, we tend nowadays, each qualification has an industry advisory board. This is certainly the case at the University of Canterbury. That industry advisory board assists us in ensuring, as I said, relevance and employability after graduation. Very importantly, however, we are able to bridge the gap in how we're using technology within the university with how it's being used in respective sectors of the economy. I see technology as both an enormous opportunity, and particularly AI and machine learning, but along with opportunity, one always has to think about risk and mitigating those risks. Now, one of the headlines that I encounter most in the media is how AI helps students cheating, and I'm sure you've all seen that. Yes, it is a challenge, but the way I look at it is from a different perspective. Now, most of you have been in this room would have been familiar with something called the final year examinations, right? Where, and if you think about it, even before the progress of technology, and if you're in my age cohort, you will be familiar with cramming and the like. And mostly those examinations were about memory and learning and repeating. What it requires of us as educational institutions is rethinking how we assess and what the purpose of assessment is. And that's been my perspective, and that's the perspective I talk about quite frequently when I have the opportunity. Given we live in a world where knowledge is ubiquitous, you can look up almost anything you need to find from a content perspective. What are the fundamental skills that we want to impart in a qualification? What are those skills that should last a lifetime, and which aspects should we embrace in micro-credentials that allow upskilling, reskilling over a lifetime as well, given how the place of work and the world is changing? So I think there are a variety of ways that universities are addressing these. Another aspect is ensuring that we have work-integrated learning opportunities for all graduates. Work-integrated learning is a great benefit for the students, and we've had feedback at the University of Canterbury that it's also a benefit for many of our prospective employers. Unfortunately, it is an area that does require an investment. It's not merely about a financial investment, but an investment of time and talent, because the students who undertake work-integrated learning do need levels of supervision. But we have found that employers have embraced these opportunities because it also brings benefits to them in choosing who to employ and in closing any... I've heard from some of our bigger employers that it often in the past took them 18 months to ensure that a graduate was completely work-ready, and they had to invest more in workplace training. By working closely with our universities, it closes that gap and avoids that expenditure by giving students opportunities for work-integrated learning while they're studying. And it's also helpful for us as institutions. I did also earlier on talk about professional bodies, but that is another partnership that's extremely useful for us. So back to technology. I see it as an enormous opportunity, but like all progress in the world, there are risks, and we mitigate those as circumstances change. But let me once again refer to the advent of micro-credentials. Now, in terms of access, Lord Swires, that question, this is where technology really does come into its own. And all our member institutions across the Commonwealth had to accelerate their efforts to adapt to hybrid learning, as it's now termed, or blended learning. And I'll give you an example before I conclude. So at the University of Canterbury, we offer a graduate qualification in nursing. In New Zealand, there's been a shortage of nurses, and this allows any graduate to enroll in a nursing qualification. And it's completely online, except for the clinical aspect, where they get placed in a local healthcare centre. It allows those who are already working to study while they're working, to continue earning an income. And very interestingly, and I showcase this as an example of how technology enables access. Most of those who have enrolled are from small towns in rural areas. We're tracking them in a study because I believe by using technology to study, they are more likely to remain in those small towns and rural areas to improve the capability of the healthcare sectors where they live. Whereas in the past, that's always been a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge where urban areas are more likely to attract professionals than the rural areas. So I see technology as an enabler of access, but we have the responsibility as the ACU, as universities, as professional bodies, as public commissions to make sure that we use it responsibly with all the mitigations like privacy and data sovereignty in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Joseph Garcia, I mean, Minister, your economy in Gibraltar is different to a lot of other economies in the Commonwealth. You presumably need much more, or you need graduates who are technically qualified. The great industries in Gibraltar, correct me if I'm wrong, being insurance, gaming, and so forth, need a different sort of qualified student. But then how do we ensure that, given the socio-economic diversity across the Commonwealth, that business and governments, particularly in the smaller states, can learn from each other about repositioning their economies and retaining their workforce in order to generate growth and investment? So what can other economies learn from what you're doing in Gibraltar and vice versa?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to you, Lord Swire, to Lord Marland, and to Seawick and the team for these 2 days of very productive discussions between business and politicians and governments. I think it's been very, very useful. Also to Samoa for hosting this event in their wonderful country, and to the people of Samoa who have been ambassadors for the country in an absolutely excellent kind of way. So thank you for that. Now, for context, let me say that Gibraltar occupies 6 square kilometers of land area, so they don't come much smaller than that. 32,000 people and 31,000 jobs. So we are in the peculiar situation where we have more jobs than people. And there are 15,000 people who cross over from Spain and the European Union to work in Gibraltar every morning and to then cross back home every evening. So we're an island in a political sense, but not geographically. We're an island politically. I think the Commissioner made a very valid point that in our situations, in the case of small territories and small countries, we have 2 main resources, and those are our land and our people. And we need to make sure we use them as productively as possible to generate economic wealth and economic activity. And indeed, it is true that in many small countries, governments are very often the largest employer. In our case, that has now changed slightly, and the private sector employment has taken over from the public sector in many areas, as Lord Sawyer mentioned, in many new areas relating to the digital economy, which continues to develop, and which I think is the key to the economic development of many small countries, because you don't need that much space and you don't need that many people to do it. So I think that there's also a point that needs to be made in relation to the need for a seamless transition from education to training to employment. And it's important, I think, for government and sometimes also for the private sector to identify opportunities. So I can only speak for our case and for what we have done and developed in Gibraltar. But one example, which Lord Swire referred to now, was the online gaming industry. So there was a situation where telephone betting was a large UK telephone betting company decided to operate into the United Kingdom market from Gibraltar. That led to other companies migrating and following suit. And there are now 77 such employers in Gibraltar, employing nearly 4,000 people. So that developed over 20 years, and it's been the result of the digital economy to be able to work from wherever you are in the world into other parts or other countries of the globe. And in our case, it's worked very well. Many of those jobs are occupied by people who don't live there, but nonetheless it generates economic revenue, tax revenue for the government. So it's important as we sort of take the discussion forward that I think there should be two elements. One is in-country dialogue within the country itself as to how to progress economically. And secondly, international dialogue, like this type of forum, where people can come, put across their point of view, explain what they do in their own countries, and where countries of the Commonwealth can certainly learn from each other. And when I say learn, I mean not just learn about the successes, but also learn about the pitfalls and about the mistakes, to make sure others don't make the same mistakes that we have made in the wider context of employment and economic development. In terms of connecting jobs to people, education in Gibraltar is free. So from a primary level all the way up to university level, it's paid for by the state. So the state pays to send students to the United Kingdom university. They can then do a degree, and they can also do a master's later on as well, if they so wish. But there has been, and we found in the economic niche that we found for ourselves, they need to develop into specific areas. One area, for example, has been telecoms and engineering, where we had a difficulty in attracting engineers. And what our telecoms company decided to do was to offer those students the opportunity to study in the United Kingdom and to pay them while they were studying, to then bring them back to Gibraltar in summer holidays and Easter holidays and employ them during that time, and then to offer them a job and permanent employment at the end of the degree. So by linking studies and scholarships to work in that very direct way, it's something which actually works for them in the area, for instance, of engineering. So I think it's important, as I said earlier, to share knowledge, data, and information, and also to make the point in relation to small island territories and indeed to small countries, that this is an area where size does not matter. I mean, Gibraltar, for example, just a couple of weeks ago hosted an event for Indian businesses in the United Kingdom and Gibraltar businesses, and they were able to find synergies with each other where the Indian businesses were able to explore how they could impact and how they could obtain work from the industries which operate in Gibraltar in the digital sphere, and where Gibraltar businesses were able to find partners externally in a large country and in a huge market, as is the Indian market. And there was a second event last week organized by the High Commission of India to the United Kingdom, which again proved very successful. So it shows how a very large, huge Commonwealth country can work together with a tiny, microscopic Commonwealth country and find synergies in each other's markets and in each other's work. Also, I should say that although Gibraltar is tiny and very small, we operate quite a large market in services, as Lord Swire said, in insurance and in other areas. And trade between Gibraltar and the United Kingdom, for example, is $10 billion a year, which makes little Gibraltar the 34th largest trading partner of the United Kingdom. So even if you're small, it doesn't mean that you cannot be successful or aspire to operate and to work with large countries. So, as I said earlier, land and people are the two main resources that we have, and we have to make sure we exploit them fully.
Great. And I was lucky enough to be at one of those Gibraltar Indian events in London. A bit of support from some Gibraltarians in the audience, I think. Wouldn't it be nice, too, if those 15,000 people who come in the morning to Gibraltar across La Linea and go back in the afternoon were able to do so as well without being bothered? Wouldn't that be nice? Thank you very much indeed for that, Minister. I got a further follow-up question. In your experience, what leadership qualities are most essential for navigating the complex economic challenges of small states and territories? How can young leaders across the Commonwealth be better equipped to drive sustainable development in their respective regions?
So I think government needs courage and need vision. I think it's important to look forward and see where the next big thing is coming from, and to try and exploit that and to take advantage of it. I said how we had performed with online gaming, for example. There's also the very new and very evolving crypto and DLT sectors. In 2018, when this was just very embryonic, we were probably one of the first jurisdictions in the world to devise a regulatory framework for crypto. So this was happening all over the place, but nobody was actually regulating it. So we took this from concept and from idea to law very, very quickly. It's one of the advantages of a small nation. You can move faster than larger nations, and you can still move properly and adequately and well, but you can move quicker. And we devised and now implemented in law an entire supervisory framework for crypto. It's supervised by our Financial Services Commission, and we now have 10 firms operating in Gibraltar in this particular very new embryonic market. Many of them, I should say, are run by young people. Some of those young people have actually delivered presentations to the United Nations on what it is that they have actually done in Gibraltar. So it's important, I think, to empower youth in these areas, because these are areas specifically which appeal to young people. We established also, I should say, a digital skills academy in Gibraltar that takes on children from the age of 12 to the age of 18. It happens after school hours, so they get their normal schooling until about 3:30 p.m. and then they go off to the academy. And there was a prime example of cooperation between the public sector and the private sector, because it was in a property company provided the premises at no cost, a crypto company, a security company, and a gaming company and an electronics company all came together with the government to set up this academy at no cost to the taxpayer. And what they do there is they explore things like cybersecurity. They look at things like programming, coding, primary robotics, and all these areas which are beyond me and my comprehension as a historian, but all of it works extremely well. And now 600 students in Gibraltar have gone through the Digital Skills Academy. Equally, another niche area we exploited was a Digital Athletes Academy. This relates to gaming in the electronic sports sense. Certificates are now issued to young learners who take part. Again, the premises were provided privately by private industry and private sector funding. And this is an area which is estimated it's going to grow in the next 5 years by some over £5 billion, which is $7 or $8 billion. So it's important, I think, to be positioned for the world to come and not just for the world that exists at this particular moment in time.
Thank you. And do you think you should declare an interest in Gibraltarians accessing UK universities? Okay, thank you very much. There's a little in-joke there. Charlotte, the chair of the Auckland Chamber of Commerce, Charlotte Parkhill. I'm going to turn to you now, if that's right. How can major corporations play a role in creating more inclusive pathways for young people, especially those from underserved communities, to enter and thrive in the workforce?
It's a topic, Lord Swire, that is dear to the Chamber's heart. Is this on? No. All right, we'll use your one. Thanks. Tēnā koutou katoa. I do want to echo what the Minister said before, to thank the Samoan people for such a warm welcome. It's been a fantastic 2 days. And thank you, of course, to CBF for organising it. Now, I just said before when the mic was off, this is a topic which is really dear to the Auckland Business Chamber's heart. But I want to start by saying it's not all on business, is it? It has to be about collaboration. And, that word is just so overused these days. Everybody talks about it, but doesn't actually do it. And what we're trying to achieve through the Chamber is really fostering that collaboration and bridging that gap between the private sector and the public sector and, of course, the educational institutions to make sure that we get people from underserved communities and young people coming through education and into business so that business thrives. And, one of the best things that I see as a chair of the Chamber, but also going to the Institute of Directors conferences now in Auckland, the idea that you can have a board of old white men is gone. And thank you, Jesus, for that, because I'll tell you what, it is just, if you have not got a diverse board, you will be left behind. And the Chamber's proud of its diverse board. It's fantastic to look around and seeing the fact that I'm the chair of it. I'm very proud of that. So that's a great thing, isn't it? So we are leading from the top. We're leading the charge. We're expecting diversity, and those that don't do it will not thrive. So that's great news. But what about the how? That's what we're really interested in, isn't it? How do we collaborate? How do we get there? And I was talking to Blair Turnbull, who's the CEO of Tower. They've got a lot of offices around the Pacific and Fiji, Samoa, places like that. And he was talking to me about this fantastic scholarship system that they put in place where they not only pay for the individual's education, they promise them a job at the end, somebody from the local community. And that is real efforts being made by a corporate and putting their money out there to help somebody come through from an underserved community, which is fantastic. And, we at the Chamber, we have initiatives to try and bridge that gap. You talked about it before, Cheryl, trying to get corporations and educational institutions and to reach out to the students. Because, I was talking to Leah Gates, who heads our employment division at the Chamber, and she was telling me that if you just there was a recent survey done of students, and 50% of those students, when you ask them, what do you want to do when you leave? They choose one of 11 jobs. Law, nursing, teaching. The standard things that everyone knows about. But there's, upwards of 28,000 different jobs that you can have out there. And so how do we get the knowledge to our students about what's available to them? You don't have to, be a lawyer at the end. I mean, I'm a partner of the largest law firm in the world, Denton's. And do you know how many applications we get for our 20 jobs in Auckland? 600. 600 applications. Now, these are law students, being taught to think. There are other things that these people can do. They are great problem solvers, often fantastic debaters as well, frankly. So they've got these incredible skill sets, but there's a knowledge gap between what they know about what's out there and what they can become, and we need to help them to achieve that, and that is on business. So what we've developed in the Chamber is a program called Tech Steps, and that's all around the AI and technology space. And, gone are the days, hopefully, of the idea of being in the tech space, being the person, in a little room with big glasses, hyper intelligent, no one else can do it, So luckily that's moving on, but we're trying to really make it more inclusive, that space, because it's not very diverse, right? So here's some stats for you. So only 2%, and this is in New Zealand, only 2% of employees in the tech space in New Zealand are Pacifica people, and only 4% are Māori. And we've got 22% of Pacifica and Māori people within the population. So really, really underrepresented in that space. And why is that? Maybe they don't see themselves in it. That's what we have identified as the gap. And frankly, as a lawyer, I can't blame them. I don't really know what tech people do. So how do we educate these people, right? How do we educate students into what can be a really, really successful career? And how we've done that is we get our tech ambassadors, right? And Liz and her team identify ambassadors who will reach these people, and they will understand what it is, what the job opportunities are out there. We've created TikTok videos. One of our TikTok videos got 5 million hits just from New Zealand. I know, pretty good. I'm not in the video, in case you're wondering. And sort of creating that content, doing a lot of events. And there's a lot of excitement now. This is our first year, so I haven't got any success stats to share with you, but we're looking really forward to it. It's been a really great initiative by the Chamber. And the other the other program that we have in place is Cadet Max, and that's for really high-risk youth, and 64% of those individuals are Pacifica people. And basically, if you're 18 years old and you go on a benefit through the government, some sort of support, the stats say that you will be on a benefit for around 19 years. So it is that early intervention is really important. And through the Cadet Max program, partnering between government, it's the government contract, and endgame businesses, we've put 4,500 of those people into employment, and they have remained in employment. So those sorts of bridging the gaps for underserved communities are really, really important, I think. And then from there, just looking even from the example of my private practice, we are aiming for diversity. And we do things that we partner with Tupatoa to ensure that we have Pacifica and Māori people coming through, not just everybody from King's College. We need more people. I mean, the whole community is more diverse. We've got diverse clients. They expect us to be diverse. Large law is under enormous pressure to open up and actually have a more diverse workforce, and we are thriving because of it. It's fantastic. So it is, in terms of how we ensure that people remain with us and not move on, we make sure that we have an inclusive workplace. We celebrate different, not just Christmas and Easter, we celebrate Diwali. We celebrate all sorts of things within the firm. It's fantastic.
Well, from an old white man, thank you for those comments.
I know, I do. White men are
vulnerable
fine.
sector, I think. You've touched on this, but can you just say a little bit more about the role of the private sector, not least in collaborating a culture of innovation of young people, which supports environmental sustainable development and so forth. What role can the private sector do to ensure that this is happening, which leads to long-term societal benefits?
Yeah, thank you. One of the first things I would counsel all of us to do is take a breath and stop railing on Generation Alpha. Honestly, the amount of times I hear people, particularly in my firm, say, oh, these people, short attention spans, they want to be partners straight away. There's a lot of sort of negative, and every generation does it, don't they? I mean, we're the best generation, clearly. But, we do have to adapt our workplace to make sure that we can harness the skills of these people, because I put this on ChatGPT. Give me the characteristics of Generation Alpha, and I'll read it out. And it's all true, because it's in ChatGPT, so it must be. So they are, 1, tech savvy. I heard the word digital native used a couple of times yesterday, and it's so true. My 9-year-old daughter far surpasses my ability in the technology space. They're environmentally aware. We ruined the planet, they will fix it. Or we're trying to fix it, not doing a great job. It says they've got short attention spans, but they're also excellent at multitasking. And they are diverse and inclusive. And how great is that? They're the kind of people you do want in your workplace. So, in terms of the question around innovation, we need to create space for them to innovate and bring their great minds to the table. And, law is an old, stuffy profession, frankly. And the young people that come through, and through the summer clerks, the initiatives that they've put in place around our sustainability targets have just been fantastic. And it's about giving them the space to do that. Bit of guidance around the edges, obviously. It's not a free rein. You do need to give them some help and support. But it is actually saying to them that their voice will be heard, that they have a seat at the table on these really important things that matter, like sustainability. But I think, to your point, Lord Swire, on the question, innovation is great, but it must achieve sustainability targets now, particularly around all the climate comments that we heard yesterday.
I want to come back at the end about AI and the way that's going to shape the future workforce and how you're all trying to respond to that. But Nero, my fellow board member of CWIC, Nero comes from Sri Lanka. He works for the Capital Maharaja Group, and Sri Lanka has had some significant economic challenges, I think is the best way of putting it, over recent years. Nero, what strategies can the private sector, which you represent in Sri Lanka, do to reverse the difficult trend, the brain drain, You gave an example this morning of a brain drain, basically, rather a live one. But, I mean, what hope are there for young professionals within Sri Lanka? How are you going to keep them there? How are you going to educate them better to transform Sri Lanka into the economy that it should be, rather than the economy which sadly it is?
Thank you, Lord Swire, and talofa everyone. I'm thoroughly enjoying my time here in Samoa. The example that Lord Swire referred to, for those of you who are staying on the ship, you may know that there's 30 of the crew are actually from Sri Lanka. So the over-servicing that you're getting on that ship is just one example of our hospitality. So Sri Lanka went through a terrible economic crisis post-COVID. COVID took away the tourism industry, and that was a significant contributor to the foreign exchange reserves of the country. In addition to that, our exports, to a great extent, were import dependent. So Sri Lanka is a large producer of apparel and garments for the US and European markets, but those textiles that come in are imported from different parts of the world. The packaging for the tea is also imported to export our tea. So the import restrictions and foreign exchange crisis caused a catastrophic economic crisis. And many people during that time, in fact, 50,000 people a month left Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka ran out of passports. And those people moved either for economic reasons of their own, lack of confidence in the government and the country. And in my personal experience, the people that I worked with in our company, they left because of the future of their children. So my secretary, who had been with me for quite a long time, whom I relied on, an enormous amount, she came to me one day and said, "I love working here, I love working with you, but my son's 2 years old and I have to think about his future." And I completely understood that perspective. So I helped her to migrate. I helped her and helped her with the documentation, with sponsorship, etc., to move to Canada, another wonderful Commonwealth country, of course. And the beneficiaries of Sri Lanka's migration have been predominantly Australia and Canada. Now, I'm not saying that migration is a bad thing, right? I think migration is almost inevitable. It happens. We're all migrants at some point, right? The world is populated because of migration. So it is inevitable. But I think what's really important is the steps that governments and policymakers and even the private sector take to create a more conducive environment to encourage people to stay or migrate inwards. There are certain countries that have limitations in terms of inward migration, but nevertheless, I think it's really important to try and retain your population and provide them with the opportunities that would encourage them to either return after migrating or to stay. The private sector has done its best, but I don't think they've quite pivoted the way that I would have expected them to. Traditionally, we're a manufacturing business, and we've pivoted to being knowledge services based. So identifying Sri Lanka's key resources and looking at capabilities within the island and providing people an opportunity to retain gainful employment, but providing knowledge as an export service is something that we've done. Speaking of which, there are some initiatives being taken in providing independent non-executive directors from Sri Lanka who've had enormous amounts of experience, who are highly qualified, taking positions in various different public companies around the world. One of the most successful companies in this last 2 years has been one that provides an augmented workforce for startups, because those startups struggle to pay the regular sort of salaries that one would expect in their own markets for a person of that level of experience. So those startups employ people from Sri Lanka who have more experience at probably a third of the cost, which then supports the startup with a low-cost base to build and then recruit people from their own market and build a much more robust startup. So it actually has a positive contribution on the economy of that startup. So there are some examples that Sri Lankans have explored, and I think that the opportunity is still there to explore that further. I know that the Commonwealth represents an enormous amount of diversity, both in terms of geography as well as skill sets. Sri Lanka, for example, has the highest per capita number of qualified accountants outside of the UK. So financial services is one that is naturally fitting us. Lord Swire.
Thank you, Nira. And of course, there are some similarities between Samoa and Sri Lanka in terms of the large diaspora of both countries and the importance of remittance. But one doesn't only want a remittance-based economy. That's not the way to secure prosperity and long-term growth. Thank you for that. You've been responsible in trying to attract FDI into Sri Lanka. My experience has been extremely difficult, not least on account of people being concerned how they can repatriate their investment. That's probably got more difficult recently. But you've got a youthful workforce. You've got educated people there. It's a great country. How are you going to foster more entrepreneurs? And you've talked about retaining them, but I'm still not sure how you're really going to do that. You cited the example of your secretary and looking at her 2-year-old son and deciding to emigrate to Canada. Well, there must be awful lot of other people in her position at the moment, given the recent electoral changes. And Sri Lanka has been a huge success on the one hand in terms of resolving its difficulties between effectively the north and south, to put it in that phrase. But it's been less successful in its ability to manage its economy. Colombo Port City is destined or designed to be one of the new great economic cities of the world. Is that working well? Is that going to encourage more people to Sri Lanka? And is that if that works, is that going to retain a lot of the successful young entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka?
I'll talk about all of those things, actually. In terms of attracting FDI, traditionally FDI would look at what resources a country has and its market size. And most FDI would look at establishing a manufacturing plant or some form of establishment within its potential market. Sri Lanka has a relatively small market. 22 million people, although it's large on this side of the world, the purchasing power of that 22 million people is not very large. Australia has a similar population, but we're about the same landmass as Ireland. So the market in Sri Lanka is not the attractive proposition, particularly when we're next door to India, and that population is absolutely enormous. But what is attractive is the free and preferential trade agreements that Sri Lanka has that enables us to establish manufacturing facilities within the country and access multiple SAARC countries through FTAs, including India. Interestingly, Sri Lanka can access every state of India duty-free, through the free trade agreement, whereas there are interstate taxes between each state in India. So if you were looking at India as a whole market, it would be something to consider to establish your manufacturing facility in Sri Lanka. The other thing is that we have incredible ports. India's largest port, effectively, is Colombo Port. The majority of the container throughput in that port is destined for India. So FDI looks at these resources, and we have minerals and mining opportunities. Graphite is one of the most pure forms of graphite in the world. But people have failed, I think, to recognize human capital as a really valuable resource. And I think that's what Sri Lanka has in abundance. Lord Swire, you mentioned Colombo Port City. Colombo Port City is actually a real estate development. It's a very large real estate development. The managing director of Colombo Port City is here somewhere, and I'm sure you can find him. He's a member of CWIC, so if you're interested in getting in touch with him afterwards, I'm sure you can reach out to one of our CWIC team who'll connect you. But Colombo Port City offers a 25-year tax holiday for investments into and through Port City. That 25-year tax holiday is unlocked based on either the amount of capital that you invest or the number of people that you employ. And the requirement is 100 people. So as a result, a lot of BPO and KPO services from the region, which are already operating, I mean, India accounts for 50% or 55% of the world's business process outsourcing. So Indian BPOs are actually relocating their head offices into Sri Lanka, into Port City, and employing their staff through Port City to unlock a 25-year tax holiday, which is pretty attractive. So we're seeing a shift in that space. And of course, that means there's an opportunity for Sri Lankan employees as well. With respect to supporting entrepreneurs in that journey, there are many, many support services which are available in that space. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is establishing a data center in Port City to support the BPOs and KPOs that are going to establish there. Port City at this moment is a greenfield, reclaimed block of land. There's no superstructures on it, and people are not inhabiting it yet. But we're going in early and we're putting in the necessary infrastructure so that as these offices get occupied and people move in, we're there to provide services. There's obviously lots of opportunities for things like utilities, energy production, etc. And Sri Lanka will unlock those values. The political instability is something that is still yet to be overcome and something that we've had to face as a challenge. But I think if we do have political stability, we will soon find economic stability.
Well, thank you. I think I've had everyone speak on the panel so far. Before I throw it open to a wider discussion or questions from the floor, if there are any, I'm going to ask my panelists if they'd like to add anything at this point. No? So do we have any questions from the floor at this point? Does anyone want to raise anything? I'd like to, therefore, as chairman, if you'll indulge me, ask a question of my own. And it's a subject we touched on in various ways. When you're thinking about training up tomorrow's workforce and all the opportunities that e-training has and all that, how are you thinking about the kind of jobs that some of these people won't have because those jobs are likely to be replaced eventually by AI? I mean, is AI as much? We touched on this a bit. Is it as much as a threat to some sectors, or is it really an opportunity? I mean, could it open up a whole range of work and educational possibilities that we simply can't comprehend yet? Because I think we would all agree that the implications of it are profound. But just I wondered what your views were and how you were preparing for it. There's absolutely no point preparing a young workforce for the workplaces we find it today, because that workplace is going to be so very different tomorrow. Does anyone want to comment on that? Yeah, please.
Yeah, I can comment from the legal profession because it's very interesting for us. And I think what we're facing is what many of the businesses in this room will be facing, which is, as a partner, AI is not up to scratch to do my job. It's just not. It makes mistakes. And as a lawyer, we're paid to be right. And in your industries, you're paid to be experts. So the problem for us is that what it can replace and likely will replace is the work of the 0 to 3 to 4 year qualified lawyer. Now, that's a massive problem for us as a profession, because how do you become a partner if you haven't done the hard yards, you've done your contract reviews, you realise how that transcribes into later litigation. So all of that is really important ground roots legal training that our clients will be like, why do we want to pay for that? We're not paying you for that. So we are going to have to adapt, and adapt quite quickly. What we cannot do is say, oh, well, no more 0 to 4 year qualified lawyers anymore. It just won't happen. So there are ways around it that we've come up with. For example, if somebody's taken something off ChatGPT and they want a lawyer, like a senior lawyer, to review it, we will premium bill for that so that we can still retain 0 to 4 year qualified lawyers. We're going to have to get away from time-based recording and think about, well, somebody's drafted a contract for a multi-million-dollar investment off ChatGPT and they want my sign-off on it. That might take me 3.5 hours to read, but the value to the client is enormous. So we need to go more into value-based billing to ensure that we can keep the firm running to support 0 to 4 year qualified lawyers and get them to keep doing the work, frankly, and checking the ChatGPT, etc., and whatever legal generative AI tool the in-house counsel has. So that's our perspective, and I know the Chamber has got different initiatives in place to try and harness the new things that are coming in to help upskill the workforce.
But it's not just, of course, the legal system, it's the accountancy system and all kinds of other sectors.
Yeah.
And are we moving into a world where creativity is going to be important, individual creativity, which cannot be replicated, whereas a lot of these more traditional jobs, be they legal or accountancy and so forth, can be done. So people are going to have to adapt how they work, and they're going to be working in a very different way.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I think the problem that we have at the moment is it's very hard to predict where it's going to end. Everybody keeps talking about things like Terminator 2 coming along, don't they? So hopefully that doesn't happen. But there will definitely be a disruption. And it's trying to understand the level of the disruption and how we pivot. I really don't like that word pivot, but I'm going to use it. How we pivot to embrace the change and still remain profitable and viable as businesses as well.
Anyone else have a view on this? Yeah, Minister.
Yes, just a couple of points. I wouldn't pretend to be an expert on AI. Clearly, this is something which is very new. We know it's being used to great effect, for example, in some areas. But we do need to measure and see what the impact of that is going to be. You can see how in some respects it could be a threat to employment, but certainly, on the other hand, there are also very positive developments that emerge from it. And I spoke earlier of needing to identify the next big thing, and AI is clearly going to be the next big thing. I think the key is how we use it, and perhaps to allay the concerns which many people rightly have. It could be something that may be controlled by legislation or by regulation, but it is too early to say, I think.
Lord Swire.
Commissioner. I'll just get the Commissioner first, then you.
Sure. Thank you, Lord Swire. I believe, of course, I would support what our colleague from Gibraltar just said, that AI to many of us in the small island states is quite new. But we also recognize that it's something that we need to be able to grapple with and manage in terms of the development initiatives that we carry. We look towards our educational institutions to provide some kind of initial understanding of this, but by the same token, also we recognize that around our region in Pacific in particular, we would look towards our the bigger countries of the Commonwealth, particularly New Zealand and Australia, to provide the pathways into understanding better the technology that's associated with AI, and then how we would be able to incorporate all this into our education system, into our administration, into public services, and so forth. And it's something that we're moving into. A small island states, I often personally, I've always been of the belief that the world has been talking about automation for a long time. But of course, in our small island states, automation would never be a reality in the types of economies that we have. So, in a sense, what we don't want to lose out of our small island countries is that personal relationship and that personal communication between human beings that should not be replaced by AI. And we hope that we can safeguard these kinds of values in terms of the development paradigms that we discuss going into the future, and that we will never make choices that would jeopardize, the humanity that exists in our small island states. Thank you.
I think it's a very good point, but we are dealing with a Commonwealth where I think 60% are under the age of 30, so this is astonishingly relevant. It is, I think, the question of the moment, and I'm concerned that maybe some of the stronger member states within the Commonwealth will be able to adapt more quickly to AI, and that could discriminate against some of the smaller states which simply won't have the capacity to manage that change. So I think that's something we need to look at. Nero.
Full disclosure, I'm involved with a technology-based legal process outsourcing or alternative legal service provider business. And Charlotte and I had a conversation about it yesterday without realizing that we'd be discussing it today on the panel. So I agree with Charlotte in the sense that I don't think that lawyers are going to be replaced by AI, by no means. But I do think that, technology, AI, large language models are definitely going to be tools that law firms have to adopt to remain competitive. Much like the use of the internet, it's one of those things that is inevitable. We're going to use it. How you use it is going to depend on your competency, your capability, and then how you bill for it is going to depend on that capability too. So I do recognize that there will be some jobs which will be lost. Yesterday I was reading a McKinsey report, probably because I have no life, but it said that 20 to 30% of jobs will be under threat by AI, threat from AI. Now that represents about 800 million jobs. It's a significant number. But that then brings us back to the conversation we were having earlier, which is about constantly learning, upskilling, and improving your relevance in today's workforce. I don't think people are going to remain the same and let themselves be made redundant. They're going to evolve, they're going to change, and they're going to remain relevant. So I don't think we should look at it as a threat and resist it, but rather lean into it, use those tools that we have available, and adopt and adapt.
Thank you. So Nero's already coming for your job.
Yeah, that's right. I was a bit worried about sitting by him on the bus, actually.
It's already started.
But I was heartened that he thinks lawyers are going to stick around. It's a good time.
Look, a big thank you to my panellists who have behaved with extreme discipline, which is always useful as the chair of a thing. For my part, I would just say to anyone in charge of educational programme across the Commonwealth, I wish we would be a little bit more confident about telling younger people about the Commonwealth in the national curriculums and so forth. They should learn what an astonishing collection of 56 member states this is. And when we look across to Russia and we see what's going on with the BRICS meeting outside Kazan, just outside Russia, and we look at the meeting that's going on here with Commonwealth members, I think we can be rest assured that we're in the right company here in Samoa. But it's something we do need to tell those 60% of the Commonwealth under 30 about what the Commonwealth is and what we can do for each other. So big thanks to my panel, and that concludes this morning's session. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to remain in your seats while our panellists depart? We will start the next session immediately. Thank you very much.
on that one.